Good afternoon. Welcome to our Mulberry Talent Partners career conversation today. I'm going to give participants just a few more seconds to log on. Okay, as everyone begins to roll in, again, welcome. My name is Laura Back. I'm the Director of Marketing and Events here at Mulberry Talent Partners. We are a full-service staffing and recruiting agency headquartered in Portland, Oregon, with an office in Silicon Valley. We specialize in the professional placement of human resources, professional and financial office, payroll and operations positions for direct hire, temp to hire, and temporary roles. I would encourage you to check us out online at mulberrytalent.com, where you can see all of our previously recorded career conversations, upcoming career conversations, and all of our career opportunities. Today, we are joined by our fabulous founder and president, Lauren Francis. Lauren founded Mulberry Talent Partners in June of 2017, bringing over 25 years of talent acquisition and entrepreneurial experience. And we're so pleased to welcome our guest today, Terry Smith. Terry is a senior HR leader who today will be talking to Lauren about interview techniques for today's job market. Without further ado, I'll go on ahead and pass it over to Terry and Lauren, but I did want to say we're going to try to save some time at the end for questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A function here on Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer any and all questions that come in. Take it away.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I recognize many of the people that are attending today. So hi to all of you and to people that are just joining for the first time. Terry and I have known each other for many years, and we were recently we were speaking a few months ago, and I quickly realized that Terry's perspective would be incredibly valuable to our viewers. And so that's why we agreed to, we wanted to have him on to meet all of you and share his insights. Terry, can you share a little bit more about what viewers are going to be learning today from you?
Sure. So we'll talk today about just some basic tools and techniques, tips and tricks, if you will, of being ready for and participating in the actual interview process itself. We're not so much talking about how you get to the interview as to once you're there, what are some things to prepare for and be ready for and to address. So that's what we're about.
So are you bringing this from the perspective of internal employee that has interviewed many people in your career, and from someone in the job market and your experience interviewing with companies and individuals?
Yes, Lauren, that's correct. I come at it from both angles.
Mm-hmm. Sure, that's great, because that's what we need and want. So the first question, we have two questions that are written out because it helps us kind of give all of our viewers the information that they're looking for answers for today. But once you've been contacted by a recruiter about a job opening, what are key things that people should do to get ready?
Great. Yeah. It's your first opportunity, your first window to the organization. So number one, take that contact as an opportunity to learn as much as you can. You want to be sure that you're going to find out if the recruiter is setting you up for an interview cycle or process with hiring managers. You want to be sure that you know who you're actually going to be interviewing with, and that seems like a basic. But you also want to find out more about why the position is open and what are some of the challenges that exist. Some people call them pain points, but to the extent that it's possible for the recruiter to give you a sense of that, that's really important information to have up front. The second thing, be sure that you have the opportunity to research the company online. Find out as much as you can. There's a ton of resources out there available about any given organization. You can start with Google News or what have you, and really get an understanding of the organization. And if possible, you have the time, research the interviewers too. Use LinkedIn, use their names to look them up on Google and so forth, and learn about them. Learn about who they are. It's remarkable how people who are interviewing you as a candidate, they're people too, and they appreciate it if you have a bit of insight about them based on what they've presented to the world, and they appreciate that level of willingness to go learn about them. And then also, the same is true of the leaders of the organization. It's always very helpful to research who the leaders are, what they do. You'd be surprised how many times somebody gets asked the question, well, who is the CEO of our company? And you think, well, gee, that's a basic thing, but oftentimes people don't stop to do that. So really do that. It's a good way, again, to get more information and understanding about the company. And then from all that, I suggest very strongly that you develop a list of questions yourself before you walk into the interview.
Okay. And is this for in person? This is for virtual? This is, because sometimes it's obviously there's a difference between meeting the recruiter for the first time and then the interview with maybe a panel interview or some of the key stakeholders.
Right. So this is really about, once you've had the opportunity to have that conversation with the recruiter, this is about that next step in the process. You're in the interview loop now.
Right.
And whether it's on site, which is obviously not as likely these days, or virtual, these are all things that really do help you become prepared for and more comfortable with the interview setting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then why do you recommend preparing a list of questions? What's valuable about that?
Yeah, it's very basic. If you're starting a conversation with an organization, you should be really curious about this company. I mean, you potentially could be spending the next several years of your life or longer with this group of folks. So it should be pretty natural that you want to know as much about them as possible. And so your research should lead you to things that you would want to learn more about. And my recommendation is you write those out in the form of open-ended questions, just so that you start to frame in your head, what are the things I really want to understand about the organization? And also what's important to me as a candidate about that organization. That, what are things that I know are very valuable to me? And I would write those out too. And this could become a very long list of questions. And chances are fair to middling that you may not get to all of them. But in most cases, interviewers will allow you some time at the end of the meeting to ask a few questions. And so having a prepared list of questions, presents the image of somebody who has done their homework, right? Who's really actively considering this opportunity, who really wants to be engaged in this opportunity. And so rather than sit there and go, what questions do I have? You've got a list of pre-prepared questions that you can select from based on how the interview has rolled. Chances are that the interview itself, whether it's an individual hiring manager or a panel group or what have you, will also evoke some questions or may call out some of the questions you've already thought of, so then you can go right back to that and say, gee, we talked about this. What about this aspect of what we just talked about? So again, having that prepared list is really valuable from the standpoint of presenting a very professional approach.
Right. Well, how many questions are too many questions? Because I think sometimes and also at which stage are those questions appropriate?
Well, a lot of it depends on the rhythm of the interview. In some cases, the interview itself may be such that you have opportunities to just sort of inject questions as it goes. In other instances, the interviewers may go through a litany of their own questions, and then they may have reserved time at the end of the session for you to ask questions. Or they may have, they may go through their list of questions and you may have just a few minutes at the end, in which case you're going to have to think quickly about selecting questions that you think really you want to know about. I've had the experience recently of going through a panel process where literally each of the interviewers had 2 questions. They asked their questions. There were 3 interviewers, and then they were done. And then they turned it over to me. And it was an hour time frame. And I had about 40 minutes of that time to ask a bunch of questions, and I had a lot of them. So, that might be a little unique, but it's certainly one of those situations where you don't want to get caught going, oh gosh, what do I do? What do I ask? So just being prepared for that.
And I've heard this so much, and we give this advice as well, that sometimes, many times they are reserved for the end. And if the interviewer is asking, do you have any questions for us about our organization or about this role? And people, no, I'm good. That doesn't necessarily go over well, right?
No.
Yeah.
No, you, as I say, you should, by just a natural course of things, there should be questions that come to your mind. And so, it's reasonable and fair game to make sure that you have those ready to go.
Yeah, and I think too that measuring which are the appropriate questions at certain times in the interview process, meaning that I think the role is probably pretty important to evaluate or to talk through some of those questions, and then of course additional questions about the organization. Sometimes we've had people comment that, oh my God, the list of questions just like kept coming, and which is great, but we have to be thoughtful about our audience and about how we want to, we've got a certain amount of time, and we want to maybe target 2 or 3 questions that are appropriate for that particular point in the interview process. Would that be fair?
Yeah, you have to gauge it by the nature of the role. You have to kind of gauge it by the sense of what you're hearing from the interviewers and so forth. And a key component of this is being really respectful of the time. If you've got 5 minutes at the end of the interview session, stick to 5 minutes. Really be concise and be pointed in, the specific questions that you want to ask, either about the role or the organization. And really, really and it's okay to call it out and say, I want to be respectful of your time, because particularly now in the COVID environment, people, we're stacked up, we're in Zoom calls all day long, or we're in, meetings of one sort or another throughout the day, and our calendars are tight, and they probably always have been, but even more so now, because we're really being very intentional about scheduling our time. So when you're in a situation like that as a candidate, it's really important to respect that and to demonstrate that respectfulness.
Absolutely. Now, besides questions, what do you recommend the candidates prepare?
Stories. I recommend stories. You need to be able to talk about yourself. And so preparing and rehearsing stories about your career is a structured way to approach that.
So can you provide an example?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Can you provide an example of
Sure.
a story?
Well, so we've all done various things in our careers that are examples of who we are as team members and as workers. You pick, for example, a project or a sequence of events or a process or an activity that you've done in the course of your work that's relevant to the role that you're interviewing for. And, think in terms of telling that as a story. When you think about opportunities that you have socially, for example, to, talk about the work you do, somebody says, well, what sort of work do you do? You will typically land on some kind of story about something you've done recently that you're proud of, or that had a really positive impact on your group or your team or your organization, and think about it in terms of, gee, if somebody just asked me casually, tell me something about what you've done recently, and things will pop to your head in a casual situation. Capture those, on paper. I, for example, I use a spreadsheet for this, and I have for each tab on the spreadsheet, I'm telling a particular story about a particular thing that I did. And every tab has, one complete story told on each tab.
It's more digestible, right, for the listener.
Yes.
To hear it in the story form than any other way in a conversation. Would you say?
Adjustable, did you say?
In a story form, as opposed to, that's the best way to communicate, and it has a greater impact than.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We are a storytelling culture, by nature, and we are intrigued with stories, and given the opportunity, most of us like to tell stories from time to time. If the folks that are interviewing you are good at what they're doing and listening carefully, from these stories, they will start to hear more and interpret more about how you behave when, you're telling the story about yourself, and also about who you are as an individual in the organization, how you come to work, how you show up. The stories and the way you tell the stories will really help them to frame that.
Yeah, for sure. And so for you, you seem, you have a spreadsheet and really organized and prepared. And it seems like you're probably really good at sharing those stories. What if some of the people that are listening today are not as comfortable, or they don't feel they're a good storyteller?
Sure. Yeah, and I understand that. It's a practice. So a very popular method of interviewing these days, and many of you probably have heard about this, is the STAR approach, the situation, task, action, result. It's a very popular model among recruiters. It's gained a lot of popularity sort of in the interviewing world as a means of articulating, you know, what was the situation, what needed to be done, what did you do, and what happened as a result of it. And there are literally, I mean, hundreds of lists of STAR questions that are available on the internet, very general questions. They're very behaviorally oriented, behavior-based. And so, and those resources are eminently available. And I strongly recommend going in and grabbing some of those and start to think about in terms of, you know, looking back at your career and your world, the things you've done, whether it's for prepping for a particular interview or just practicing and getting the rhythm of telling stories, using that model. And, you know, I would consider, if you're feeling, you know, not as comfortable with it, actually writing it out, actually writing down the STAR approach for each story that you would tell. Well, I had this project that I worked on. Okay, so tell me about that, you know, write down what that situation was, what was necessary to get it done, what did you go do? And then because of what you did, what happened? What was the result? And just getting comfortable using that model to talk about the things in your career will actually really help relax you, because it becomes more of a pattern of storytelling, where a lot of us, you know, that have told a lot of stories over the years, we have different ways of telling them. Other folks may not have that same sort of sense of it. So the opportunity to use this framework to build your story and fit your story into that framework is really great. Gives you a toolkit to work with, right? It gives you an opportunity to tell stories that highlight the things that you've done and the things that you're proud of and the things that you've done that, you know, have stuck with the organizations that you worked with and so forth. And having that toolkit available to you of those stories, just to be able to pull those out, because chances are what will happen is that in the interview process, you'll run into, you know, a question that will call to mind for you one of the stories that you wrote down. And so having that sort of rehearsed, you know, opportunity really, really helps.
Yeah, makes a big difference. My daughter's applying to grad schools, and she was, you know, her coach told her, you know, practice in the mirror,
Yep.
practice with a friend, and get comfortable doing that. And it's weird at first. It just is
Yes.
not you just feel like you're just it just feels weird. But then you start, you know, I hear her in the shower, you know, rehearsing, and you kind of do it when you're driving, or you just get comfortable sharing your story, and it just starts to, you know, it just becomes easy and it makes a difference.
And I love your point about friends too. I mean, I've had the opportunity to just do that over the course of the last many months, just to say, hey, you know, I want to tell a story about something I did, or something will come up in conversation with, you know, a friend or, you know, what have you. And they'll just say, really, tell me about that. And so that gives me that opportunity to go through that process. And the best part of that too is that, especially with somebody that you're interacting with, they're going to ask you questions, right? Well, what do you mean by that? Or what happened when you did this? And that gives you an opportunity to refine it a little bit, you know, and to think through, okay, how could I tell the story a little bit better, right?
Absolutely. So how do you recommend that people, to follow up from an interview?
Yeah, so once you've gone through that, I think it's important to definitely reach out to the recruiter who contacted you initially about it. Follow up with that person and, you know, demonstrate, hey, I've been through the interview process now. I thought it was great. I really appreciate the opportunity, and very interested in going forward. And then if you're able to, I strongly recommend reaching out to the interviewer or interviewers themselves through email. You know, they may provide you that information, how to reach them. If they didn't, then you can ask the recruiter for their email address and say, gee, I'd really love to just follow up and let them know I appreciate the opportunity. And sometimes the recruiter will provide that, you know, that's fine. Here's the email address. Sometimes they won't, because they want to kind of manage the situation a little bit, manage the process and the flow. So, you know, and this is kind of skirting around things a little bit, but in a situation like that, you may still want to reach out to the interviewer directly And the way that you can do that is you can take the nomenclature from the recruiter's email address. So it might be terry.smith@xyzcorp.com. And you go, well, let's see, if it's that, then chances are, it's probably the interviewer was Lauren Francis. So it's probably lauren.francis@xyzcorp.com, right? So, and 9 times out of 10, that's going to be accurate. And typically I find that, if the recruiter has said, gee, why don't you just flow it through me? The hiring managers, more often than not, if you've interviewed, with a hiring manager or a team or what have you, they do in fact actually appreciate that extra outreach. I've run into nobody in my career who has said, gee, I was really annoyed when that person reached out to thank me for interviewing, even though the recruiter or the in-house recruiter may be wanting to try and manage that program a little bit. I've never heard somebody say, well, that was really out of line for them to reach out to me. What I have heard is, gee, they took an extra step, figured out how to reach me and sent me a nice note. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So, that works very well. LinkedIn is also another good resource for that too, because, it could be that you could reach out through LinkedIn in a way that, it's just kind of separate and distinct. It just says, hey, I wanted to follow up. I appreciate the opportunity to interview with you all, and so on. And that then doesn't necessarily ruffle the feathers of, the person who might be trying to manage the flow a little bit. So, and you can certainly do both. And I do not discourage that at all. I think it's really valuable to do it.
It is. And I also feel it's very valuable to do it either the day of and at the latest the day after.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Being diligent about being on time with that is really a good thing.
It's a really good thing.
Yeah.
Do you feel like people should ask for business cards? I haven't given out a business card since February, right? And I'm not alone, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But and I don't know if people are carrying them as much as they used to, because we're not using them right now. But would that be appropriate in some?
If you're actually on site with some folks in an interview process that is actually a COVID managed process, then, it's probably okay to ask for that. Although again, with the current circumstances, you may not necessarily want to exchange business cards just because of the nature of the situation.
Okay.
So I think you have to be a little sensitive to that. I think there are more and more organizations that are going away from business cards just because, we've become so much more of a digital community, especially in the last 9 months. So.
Right. The other thing I've heard is that a lot of people appreciate a handwritten note. However, there's the risk that it won't reach them, particularly now, but even before, if it's a large company and so on. So
Yeah.
You could do both, but we tend not to recommend that based on the fact that it could not reach them.
Yeah, I think we're particularly now we're in such a digital mode that it's definitely an extra step, and some people appreciate it. Some people kind of shrug their shoulders.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, for sure. So we have quite a few. No, I wondered if any final words of wisdom you can share, and then we have quite a few people that are in the chat as well as the Q&A, and Laura can come on and go through that. Looks like she can. Here she is. So, do you have any final words before we get into questions?
Yeah, just 1 or 2 quick things. First of all, let's not forget one fundamental thing. It's not that in the situation of being in the interview, it's not only that they are interviewing you, it's important to remember you are interviewing them, and that you are a person that they are interested in one way or another. They want to talk to you. They're putting time and effort into that. So be conscious of the fact that, it is a more balanced scenario than it oftentimes feels like, that you bring something that they want. Mm-hmm. And, whether you're the exact right person or not is yet to be determined, but, understand that you bring something that is important to them. And so you have some capacity in the situation.
Right. There is a reason why you're there, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Laura. What do you have for us today?
Great. So just I'll jump into questions, but first there was a comment from Jeff who says that LinkedIn Premium has a feature which allows you to answer specific behavioral questions. It will record you, and then AI will give you feedback regarding the tone of your voice and the pace of your speech, which is kind of cool.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Let's see. Aaron asks, is there a point when it's just too late to send a follow-up thank you?
If you get much past a couple of days, you've kind of missed the boat.
Yeah.
Agree.
You know.
Okay. All right. Tom says, I believe one of the things interviewers are looking for is authenticity of who the candidate really is as a person. However, as a candidate, this is a sales call of pitching yourself. What advice do you have in balancing these two perspectives?
It's a great question. My advice is to listen to the interviewer. Listen carefully to the tone that they're bringing, for two reasons. One, because the interviewer will likely pick up on the fact that you're listening to them. And two, you can, based on what cues you get from the interviewer, you can adjust accordingly. You can, emphasize a little bit more of sort of that personal authenticity, or you can hone in more on sort of that sales side of things. And just listen and gauge it based on what they bring to you.
Great. This attendee asks, not a virtual interview question, but in your opinion, is the handshake gone forever in terms of a formal introduction?
Maybe not forever, but for the foreseeable future, I think it's a risk.
Yeah, to put your hand out.
Yeah. And then hand sanitize after, which may be insulting.
Right, exactly. And I think the vast majority of everybody in the current condition understands that. I don't think anybody's going to get tense about saying, oh, gee, they didn't try to shake my hand, or gee, they did try to shake my hand. They might get a little more tense about that part. But, if you, just kind of offer a welcoming image as you're walking in, and I think we can all agree, yeah, we're probably not going to shake hands. That's okay, type of thing.
Right. Okay. And then Tom also asks, in scheduling the interview, is it acceptable to ask who will be interviewing so you can research the individuals? I know you touched on this a little bit. So maybe what's the best way to get this information?
Just ask. And yes, it is. It's absolutely in bounds to ask who you're going to be interviewing with. I mean, as somebody who has led recruiting teams and has been a recruiter myself, you absolutely should be able to tell your candidate who they're interviewing and why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Why am I meeting this person or that person? Or what, not why from the sense of being combative, but just saying, how would I interact with that person if it's not clear, right?
Sure.
That's great. And then Jeff asks, any advice on how to direct the interview into more of a conversation versus question and answer while still answering their questions?
I have found that actually, again, it's kind of gauging the interviewer a little bit, but what can sometimes help is if the question begets a question in your mind. Somebody asks me a question and I think about it for a second. I say, actually, so I'm curious about that. Can you say more about what you mean by this, right? And then that kind of opens the door for them to be a little bit more forthcoming about information and a little bit more maybe background, what's the question behind the question type of stuff. And what I found is that if I can turn that question to a question of my own, that starts that ball rolling pretty nicely.
It does. I agree completely.
I think this is a good final question before we go into how to stay in touch with all of us. Best tips for closing the deal.
Wow. Well, I really want this job. No. I think my best thought on that is what I've said more than once, and it has worked more than once, is, I really look forward to being a part of this team. I think we can operate well together. I think we can do good work together, not only now, but in the long run. And I'm really looking forward to how we make that happen.
Perfect.
That's great. That's great. So believe it or not, we have reached the end. Typically, we would be sharing our upcoming career conversations. We have those in the works, and we will be sharing all of those probably later on this month, as this is our last career conversation of 2020. So in closing, here's how to stay in touch with us. I would encourage you to connect with us on LinkedIn if you haven't already, and also to connect to Terry. And thank you for choosing to fly with Mulberry. We know you have a lot of options when it comes to webinars, and we really appreciate you choosing to join us. And thank you to Lauren and Terry for a very informative and interactive conversation today.
Thank you.
It was a great conversation, Terry. And to all of our viewers, we will be sharing the link of this conversation later. Would it be next week, Laura, probably? Or
it's Thursday, so early next week we'll share this in an email to you all.
Yeah, and we encourage you all to like, comment, and share this interview with others that could benefit from Terry's wisdom and this conversation. So thanks so much, and happy holidays to everyone.
Yes, happy holidays. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.